Lewis?
I am here.
Mr. Rowe? Here. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Absolutely.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 28th, 2023 meeting.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Special reports? None, Mr. Lauer?
No.
Okay, we'll move right into audience comments. This is the portion of the meeting where any member of the audience can speak for up to 5 minutes on a non-agenda item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak?
Man in the back row there.
No, of course, sir. I ask that you please identify yourself and your address and also sign in on the sign-in sheet, please.
Name is John Dominic. I live at 104 Fairway Drive. This is mostly in response to a conversation I recently had with Mr. Lauer. So, prior to Peters Township acquiring Rolling Hills Country Club, I was asked to allow A&F Landscape to use my yard to set up their boom truck to remove 2 dead elm trees. The reason for this was because over the years, between dumping and cutting trees by the grounds crew, there was no access. Peters Township acquired the property, and shortly thereafter, a large pine tree fell on my garage. Another pine tree fell on my neighbor's shed. Your maintenance department removed both trees by working their way down through the park, and I came before council to thank them for their prompt and professional action. The damage to my garage was $16,000. I'm not sure about my neighbor's shed. It had to be removed. My insurance carrier paid most of my claim, and my neighbor's insurer paid hers. I filed a claim with your insurer, Trident Insured, and was told that they had no knowledge of the hazardous trees, and Mr. Stephen Nutbron denied my claim. Mr. Lauer came to my home, and after viewing the trees, agreed they were dangerous, and as the first step in the park's development, they would be removed. I received a letter dated December 2nd, 2020 from the township stating that they were going to begin tree cutting activities to eliminate the existing giant pine trees because they represent a hazard to nearby structures and property. In the spring of 2021, Peters Township Sanitary Authority approached Mrs. Fisvis and I seeking an easement and right-of-way to install, maintain, repair, and remove sewer facilities. Because of our previous dealings with the township, we felt it necessary to have attorney draw up the agreement. And it contains specific special conditions. This was completed on April 3rd, 2021, and the sewer was installed within the easement. On March 25th of this year, another giant pine tree fell into my yard, barely missing its intended target, my garage. The Parks Department came and cut it up back to the property line and threw the cuttings into the park. 1 week later, on April 1st, another tree fell into my yard, just missing my house and my neighbor as she left through the kitchen door. The Parks Department came again, cut the tree back to the property line, and threw the cuttings into the park. Recently, the Parks Department went along the property lines and with a handheld GPS and put stakes in the ground and marked trees. Handheld GPS units can be very accurate depending on the model and the user. But trees, heavy brush, atmospheric conditions like Canadian wildfires all affect the accuracy, and their tolerances can be plus or minus 5 to 10 feet. After hearing from my neighbors that the hag trees would be cut down, and seeing Scott, the S in A&S Landscaping, parked in front of my house, I contacted Mr. Lauer. I asked him to set up a meeting at his office or my home. He said it wasn't necessary, so I asked him how they planned to access the park property. He told me that the easement would be their route. I told him that that was not an option, and he replied that he had read the agreement and their contractor would use it for access. The following Monday, I spoke to my attorney, and then the attorney, Mrs. Fisvis, and I had used to write the agreement. Both agreed that Mr. Lauer is mistaken. The agreement is between Mrs. Fisvis, myself, and the Peters Township Sanitary Authority, and is very specific about access. Beyond our disagreement about access is the fact that what has been marked to be cut down does not address the giant pine trees that represented hazards to property and structures. Every tree that has fallen over the last 30 years on mine or my neighbor's properties was a pine tree. The maple and oak trees that line the property act as a buffer to deflect your falling trees. To cut them down may create an even more hazardous condition. There are a number of solutions that should have been or can be taken. I realize the accident in Upper St. Clair and the ongoing legal issues have made the trees a more immediate issue, but the current plan, only known to a few, would create more problems than solutions. Some of my questions I had for Mr. Lauer were, are the trees going to be cut down? Are they going to be removed, or are you just going to dump them? Your contractor who did the initial development on the park, just on my property line in Mississippi alone, planted 9 pin oak, 12 pollock trees, and over 100 shrubs. Is your contractor going to work around them, or is he just going to destroy them too? 80-year-old maple trees are expensive to replace. How accurate are the stakes that your people installed? And finally, the conditions of the agreement between me and Peters Township Sanitary Authority have never been fully met. Finally, perhaps a meeting with the people most involved in this wouldn't be such a bad idea. I got a letter today. I was intending on coming, but I got a letter today that said that they were going to start tree cutting within what, the next week?
That's my understanding. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yeah, they're hoping to start next week, maybe the week after.
And what's their access plan?
Their access, because of our discussion, I spoke with the Public Works Director. They're going to come in from the park.
Okay. Are they going to work around the trees, or are they just going to destroy everything that's there?
Well, they're going to cut down more than what you probably want to see, and part of the reason being is they have to get equipment in there, and the only way to do that is to, in essence, cut in a path that allows them to get to those trees with the equipment. So,
and how accurate are they? I mean, Mrs. Biscuits and I both had our property surveyed when this all started with the park. We have pins installed. Your guys, like I said, they walked around with a handheld GPS. How accurate is it? Because like I said, trees, I know a young boy that hit a tree over off of East McMurray Road, and I think the people made him pay $12,000 for the tree to replace it. So old maple trees and oak trees are expensive to replace. So how accurate are they going to be?
John, are the pins still there?
Yeah.
Pins?
I
It should be easy then. I mean, we can just string a line between the pins.
Well, you won't be able to really string a line. You'll have to actually either use a theodolite, or once the trees are gone, it'll be real easy to tell which ones were yours and which weren't.
So I guess, maybe I'm misunderstanding something. So are you worried that we're going to cut some of your trees down when
I'm worried that you're only partially addressing the problem. When your contractor cut down trees, he didn't cut the trees down, he pushed them over with equipment. Pine trees have a real lousy root system. So when you start pushing trees over around them, you degrade the trees that are next to them. So they were supposed, I guess by township ordinance, within 100 foot of property or whatever, dead and diseased and dying trees are supposed to be removed. Well, that doesn't work real well when you've got trees that are 150, 175 foot high. Mr. Lauer's aware. They're not. They're not small.
And that's the reason why we're going in there.
They're not cutting any of those trees.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
We've had an ongoing problem down at this location, not only with trees coming down on your property, but coming down on other people's property. And this is an attempt to address that.
But you're not. Every tree that your people have marked is a maple or an oak tree, except for 2.
But we can't discriminate, though. I mean, because just because a pine came down doesn't mean that the next
one doesn't bring a maple down. But you're not going to cut down the remaining trees, the remaining pine trees that are back in there that are yet to fall.
Are those pine trees close enough that they could fall on his house?
You know what? I will be down with, someone else from my office will be down with the Public Works Director, and we can show you exactly what's going to be cut.
I mean, because I'm actually, this is all from hearsay, and that was one of the reasons why I questioned you and asked you to set up a meeting with us, because, like I said, I had people telling me, well, if you don't want them to cut the tree down, just go down and take the tag off of it. Correct? That was what your Parks Department guys told me. If you don't want us to cut it.
But that I can't speak to. But I'll tell you what, I will be down, along with the Public Works Director.
So how many trees are we talking about?
We're talking about a lot of trees in this area, but that problem with those pine trees is something that needs to be addressed. It's very dangerous.
What are they clearing out? The right of way for the sanitary authority?
No,
No.
taking down trees.
This is the bottom of the golf course.
The bottom
Yeah.
of the golf course.
They planted these white pines. These white pines are enormous, and they have fallen on various people's property.
Like I said, over,
Oh, yeah,
Mike,
because
I'll
white
be-
pine's incredibly brittle, and it
Well,
doesn't
like I
take
said,
much.
they have a minimal root system. In the 30 years I've lived there, I have 3 claims against my insurance carrier for my garage alone. And that doesn't include the number of trees that have fallen that have yet to hit, that didn't hit anybody or cause any real damage. And I always said, your parks department or your maintenance people were always very professional. They came out and always cut them up and pulled them back. But the problem is they're pulling them back and just throwing them in the woods. So you're creating even a bigger hazard
Brush pile.
and a mess.
So what are we going to do then, Paul? We're going to
I'll be down tomorrow.
But they're going to take them all out then? Is that the plan?
What they're going to do is cut them down. The intention is to chip them in place, and that's how they're going to dispose of them.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you, sir. I think it'll be
As
something.
long as
that
we're
gets-
going to have a meeting, like I said, I hate dealing with hearsay. I'd like to have someone say, this is what we're going to do. Like I said, I got a letter today saying that we're going to start cutting trees in the middle of September.
Okay, well, Mr. Lauer is going to stop down, what, tomorrow, you said?
Yep.
That came with the invoice from the attorney over our questions on access.
Is there anyone else from the audience who wishes to speak on a non-agenda
Thank you, sir.
item?
John McCarthy, 105 Greenbrier Drive. This park that used to be Rolling Hills Golf Course, you might have been speaking of it now. I went to an event at one of the pavilions. It was somebody from outside the township that rented it, and I went to the event. I was the only one there that lived in the township, and everyone there and myself was super impressed with the first-class work there, the steps and the railing to get up to that pavilion. They had a working sink there. The restrooms were beautifully done. So all of you or whoever was responsible for that did first-class planning with that. Everyone was really impressed. Second thing is I had wonderful help at Peters Township Library this last week, and please keep funding the library. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who wishes to speak? Okay, seeing no one else, we'll move on to unfinished business, of which there is none, so we'll go into new business. First item, approval for recording purposes of the Trax Subdivision Plan Number 1 is shown on drawings prepared by Keystone Surveying and Mapping, Inc., dated June 1st, 2023, for Trax Farm, Inc.
So this is a simple subdivision, currently Lot 2, which is shown on the drawing on the left, is surrounded by Trax Farm, and its access to Sugar Camp Road is across a private right-of-way. What this subdivision does is provide frontage onto Sugar Camp Road, does away with that private right-of-way, and creates a fairly large lot, and that property is coming out of the remainder of that Trax Farm parcel. So it's my recommendation that council approve for recording purposes the Trax Subdivision Plan Number 1.
In reality, am I correct in thinking that it's the frontage distance is really the only thing that is being changed in that configuration?
Well, no, because the lot is that blue square. The lot now is what you see on the right-hand side.
Oh, so it's the whole parcel.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve for recurring purposes the Trax Subdivision Plan Number 1 is shown on drawings prepared by Keystone Surveying and Mapping, Inc., dated June 1, 2023, for Trax Farm, Inc., and Earl T. and Diane E. Trax, subject to whatever conditions the Planning Commission or the Township placed on the same.
Second. Motion second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item, resolution approving policies related to township interactions with public utilities.
This has been in front of council a couple times at this point. At the last meeting, there were two suggestions regarding the policy. One, Mr. Brown suggested that the policy regarding wireless communications facilities address the removal of the facilities when they're no longer in use. The policy really isn't intended to do that. There's an existing provision within our zoning ordinance that requires that for both standalone towers and for co-located towers. So I think that's already addressed as a matter of ordinance. The second suggestion was to broaden the policy with regard to public utility maintenance activities. And so what we have proposed is that the assistant manager will reside for public utility to determine if there are any projects planned to maintain their easements and right-of-ways, as well as their infrastructure in the upcoming year. These projects include, but are not limited to, vegetation management. So with that, those changes, I'm recommending the adoption of Resolution 9-123.
I'll make a motion. Peters Township Council adopts Resolution 090123 establishing policies regarding the interaction of Peters Township with various public utilities.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion?
I have a question. Paul, do we have any policy that regulates like where they spray and kill all the vegetation? Like as far as how far it needs to be from, like say, a playground, a residential area or anything like that?
I don't believe there is anything in our ordinance that dictates that. But
there's the deed for that portion of Arrowhead Trail that they spray. Remember they had to come to council like 2 years ago or something.
Yeah.
But
it's not a matter of the ordinance. Okay.
But they would be required. They have to do that in accordance with some kind of guidelines that are issued by the DEP or something like that. Right?
Is that it?
Yep, thank you.
Anybody else have anything you want to discuss on this? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item, award of a professional services contract for the design of Phase 2 of Rolling Hills Park.
I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Miscellaneous.
Okay, you should have a memo in your docket from me and summarizes my thoughts on the matter.
We got a book a couple weeks ago.
Briefly speak to it. Several months ago, the newer members of council asked to see the master plan for Rolling Hills Park. Rightfully so. They weren't involved in the original conception of the plan. So it was reviewed. We got concurrence that the plan could proceed. So from there, we drafted an RFP. We gave it to 3 firms that we have worked with in the past. We've had large, successful projects with these 3 firms. It's HRG, JMT, and Gateway Engineers. The RFP was for the design of Phase 2 of the park. So on the overhead there, you see the area along Rolling Hills Drive that is proposed for Phase 2. Encompassed in Phase 2 will be 2 full-size basketball courts, 1 full-size deck hockey, 1 hard volleyball court, a fenced-in dog park, a new restroom building, additional parking, another driveway entrance out onto Rolling Hills Drive, and then, of course, interconnectivity of all those features with a sidewalk system. So that is the basic layout of Phase 2. How we proceeded, we went out with the RFP, and before we got a response, we actually brought all the consultants in to have, I won't even call them interviews, I'll call them like pre-proposal meetings, just to make sure that they understood what we were asking for, answered any of the questions that they might have. We thought we'd get, a more uniform RFP, which I think we did. So we got those RFPs back on August 9th. In reviewing those RFPs, we think all 3 firms are very capable firms, hence the fact that we invited them to propose to us. But the 2 that really stood out were Gateway and JMT. JMT, their strong suit is really the park planning aspect. They have registered landscape architect Andy Mears, who we worked with on the Peterswood Park expansion 12 years ago. We thought they did a great job on that with the layout of that portion of the park. We had a successful project there. Their rates are a little higher, and the price was a little higher than compared to Gateway. The thing that became obvious to us about Gateway was obviously our track record with them. I mean, they've been the Township consulting engineer since the late 1970s, so we've done many, many successful projects with Gateway and had little issues. They are available. They're always available, and the thing about these projects, when we run into problems in construction that need to be resolved, that's when the availability of the engineer really becomes an issue. And JMT, the main project manager for it, is out of the York County office, which was slightly a problem for us when we did the Peterswood Park, the availability during construction to resolve issues. So for those reasons and a couple others that I enumerated there in the memo, we would like to recommend to council that we award a contract for professional services to Gateway for phase 2 of the park. I guess one of the other things that I did want to mention was another thing we liked about Gateway's proposal, and JMT did this to some degree as well. Phase 3, the next proposed phase of the park, is actually the racket sports area, which is kind of like above phase 2 between the new parking lot and Rolling Hills Drive. Gateway is also going to lay that area out in concept just to make sure that everything that we are talking about for both phase 2 and phase 3 will actually fit and work on the ground. So we like that. Gateway was also the only company that actually came to the table with a concept layout to begin with. So that was a good kind of jumping off point during the interview. We talked about that and kicked around some ideas. And obviously, you know, there's a million different ways we could lay this out, but at least they started with some ideas and a concept that we thought worked. So I'm sure council may have questions about this. I'm glad to answer anything that you may have.
Are these facilities going to be lighted?
That's a question that we're going to be asking council because,
Yeah.
Well, I'm in favor of lighting them.
What's that?
I'm in favor of lighting, maybe not all of them, but like there's things you need to light and make it capable of being able to turn on and off.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, but
yeah, and that's one of the things we talked about during the interview. Like, part of the big engineering challenge is always extending utilities and doing the necessary utility engineering. Sanitary sewer service in this area of the park is an issue. Like, I don't know if you can picture it, but when you go up Rolling Hills Drive and look to your right, there's kind of a ridge where it breaks over the hill and goes into, like, I'll call it the aquatic center portion of the park. Well, this area rolls back towards Rolling Hills Drive, and we don't have sanitary sewer on that side. So we're either looking at maybe like a grinder pump system for the new restroom, or we have to weigh the costs and benefits of possibly extending sewer up from East McMurray Road by gravity. So there's some hardcore engineering issues there, and one of the things that Paul and I talked about, and Kyle said in on the interviews, was that you know, this is more of an engineering exercise than it is a park planning exercise. I mean, the master plan's done at this point. We know what it's programmed for. We know what should be the features that should be in the park. At this point, it's really a matter of fitting all the pieces of the puzzle together and engineering it. So for that reason, we thought that Gateway had the advantage.
But to answer your question more completely, Frank, it isn't that this is going to get designed by the township staff. This is going to be, whatever is being proposed is going to be running past the Park and Rec Board and coming to council. So this, you know, this isn't what the new Park and Rec director wants to see, or Mark or myself. It's going to be something that the Park and Rec Board and council are going to have input to. So things like this question of lighting the facilities is something I think that needs to be answered.
so, but we will have some flexibility as far as some of this other stuff, right? Like,
Yes.
like I mean, having a 2-acre dog park. I mean, I like that. I don't know where we heard it. Was it somebody we interviewed where they had like one dog park that was like, you know, for dogs that were 40 pounds or less?
Dog, yeah.
One other dog. I mean, I think that's a good idea, and I don't want to just get stuck doing one big, huge one.
No, that's already on the radar screen. So.
I mean, so what was the matter with the? I didn't understand why HRG did a time and material bid.
Well, I talked to them, and I kind of understand where they're coming from. You know, with all of these projects, I mean, there's an unknown scope. I mean, you try your best to outline a proposed scope of services, but at the end of the day, there may be permitting issues that come up that are unforeseen or whatever, utility issues. So in talking to them, they thought that the fairest way to propose was to basically, you know, phase one would be do a conceptual plan, as Paul just said, go through the process of agreeing on that, and then once we agree on a layout, then they can put a sharper pencil point to their proposal. And we were a little nervous about that. You know, they tried to give us a best guess of what it would cost, and honestly, when you look at their costs compared to, you know, I think Gateway and JMT's prices were in line with our expectations, and they were very similar to each other. There was a couple areas where I think HRG might be a little unrealistically low, especially with respect to final design, which, you know, as I said in my memo here, you know, the design's the cheap portion of the project. It's the construction that's expensive. So if you have a design that's not optimized, not efficient, or you have ambiguities in the contract documents, that's what costs you the change orders and the difficulties during construction. So for that reason, we thought that maybe HRG might have missed the mark a little bit. You know.
So if HRG is right and they wanted to be conservative because they thought there could be these unknowns, right? If those unknowns surface and we go with one of these other two vendors, is there going to be a change order for that?
It's a price not to exceed.
Yeah.
So it can't go above that, right?
Yes.
So they're not going to come in and say, oh, well, we didn't know about this, so it's going to cost you 20 grand more or 50 grand more.
Well, the way not to exceed contracts usually work is it is a not to exceed contract unless there's some outrageous unforeseen circumstance. And to go over that number, we would have to come
There
back.
could be changed conditions that might be encountered.
Yeah, the scope change.
So we'd have to pay more. Possibly, but I
Might get money back.
guess, yeah, I don't want my money back. I'm just saying the other guy's approach seemed to be more conservative, right? We're gonna in the early parts they want to see and feel it out and figure out whether there are these issues, which I think they should know before we have them bid it.
Well, we can't. I mean, that's the whole point of the conversation. We can't know what these issues are because they're unforeseen.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's impossible to perfectly define a scope.
But this is such a small project that you would not expect it. The only area that I see that's really a question mark, and you see it reflected in the bid numbers they gave you, was the cost associated with the environmental permitting. I mean, it runs from $25,000 to $54,000, and you know, one of the first things out of the chute. In fact, we were having a discussion today with Washington County Conservation District. That's where we think we need to start, because I think if there's an unknown, it's what's going to be required for environmental controls on that site.
Changing the subject here.
Just a quick question. You have to come up so we can pick you up on the microphone.
All right. That's the area right underneath the high tension lines? That's where the tower is, right?
Part of it, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's one of the unforeseen things, right?
Well, that one you can see.
That's done, but it does limit what you can do.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
This landscape architect that works for Gateway, he says he joined them in what, 2000?
He's designed it or something?
Michael McCormick.
13 or something like that. It's been there maybe 8
I was curious as to whether all of the work that they list of representative projects were done while he was at Gateway.
I don't believe so. I think some
I
of
don't
that
think
stuff
so
was done
either.
with his previous employer. And he won't be the only one working on the job. Obviously, there's a whole team of people that'll.
There's not a whole slew of landscape architects at Gateway.
No, but there's engineers and designers and stuff like that. Draftsmen.
Typically very creative.
What's the reason why we're doing not phase 3 as well with this, since it's right there and it's also
Strictly money. I mean, that project, that phase 3 calls for an indoor tennis facility, and there's not money to do that. In fact, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in the upcoming budget workshops is we have a slew of park and rec projects that are intended to move forward. And, Ryan and I were talking about this today. We got to make sure that we have the money to move ahead with all those projects. So right now you have, the township has $650,000 that's going to be tied up in improvements to ball field 1 and ball field 2. We are moving ahead with the design for the splash pad to be able to take advantage of the $3.2 million that we have in grant funds. This project here, if it's going to be possible to actually do the construction, it's going to be from the excess bond money that the township has already borrowed. And so there's not additional money sitting out there to build a building that would be, I don't know how many million dollars to build. So
what do we estimate the cost of the phase 2 and the phase 3?
We don't know because it's not designed. That's the problem, and we can't find that number until someone does the design.
I mean, I could give you a gut
You always scare
feeling.
me.
I know, I scare Paul when I do this, but I mean, it's like a $3 million plus or minus a $500,000 project, somewhere in that range.
For phase 2.
For phase 2.
What would phase 3 you think, Ron?
Oh, gosh. 7 or 8
More than that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll bet you.
7 or 8 million easily.
Pickleball,
Well, it's
and that kind of stuff.
but it's also an indoor facility. It's a building.
I wouldn't say that.
You could do the pickleball and stuff.
Phase 3.
But that's not expensive. It's the tennis.
Is that where the pickleball courts are going to be?
Sorry to go
Phase
off.
3, I'm saying you could possibly do that with the, you could paving at the same time with the basketball, but the indoor building that's the bulk.
But, and again, we haven't moved this discussion forward, but what I really think the answer to the need for pickleball courts, it's not at the old middle school.
Yeah.
I think that's where the answer to that is. And what that does is free up space inside of that area, because, again, I think we don't know this until Gateway gets done, what fits in to that area that's designated for all the racket sports.
Paul, will the school district give us that property, or we just do the pickleball and then maintain it on their behalf?
I think what we're asking for is simply access. I mean, we see, like, for instance, we don't own Elm Grove. We do that under lease with the school district. And so I would think that's the same kind of arrangement that we would want to have down there.
Have you been able to talk to them?
I have not talked to them about that yet.
And Paul, if I could address some thought relative to Tom's question, is the perception that we probably had to be able to comprehend an indoor tennis facility in the park involved, at least in my mind, the predicate to selling the property that the current tennis center is operating on as a real estate sale.
Which was kind of tied into the idea that the old
middle school was going to be
for commercial development too.
But they are two separate and distinct parcels.
Well, you could convert the existing bubble courts to pickleball courts, right? If you had a facility, not now. I mean, if you have a big facility up in Rolling Hills, then you could, whatever you have down here, I'm on this way, you could make that whatever you wanted it to be, right? You don't necessarily have to sell it. I mean, you could reconfigure it, make it into
Pickleball.
Yes, it could
by
be
itself out there.
All right, so we need to make a motion.
to award a contract to Gateway Engineers in an amount not to exceed $265,860 for the design of.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Anyone have anything else they want to discuss on this? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
6-1, Mr. Lauer, payroll and bills, Dr. Borosco.
I have reviewed payrolls and bills, all good, all in good standing order. Make a motion to approve.
Second, motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Anybody want to discuss any of the board, commission, or authority minutes? Of course not. Let's move on to miscellaneous. A, recognition of Peters Township Board members, September 20th, 2023.
Mr. Steigel had brought up about a conflict between something that's a school district initiative on that night, and I didn't know whether that was a concern for everyone or.
I had no awareness of whatever the conflict is.
That's the homecoming parade, right?
It's the P rate.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be a conflict for me.
My wife's taking the girls, so I mean, I can still go to the reception.
I'm going to the reception.
Okay. So we're going to have the reception on the 20th. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
I think so.
I think so.
Next.
Anyone object to that?
Well, I won't do that, no. I'm going to-
What do you want us to try to move?
No,
it?
if there's enough of you
Okay.
going to be there.
What time does it start?
6.
The reception starts at 5:30, right?
No, I meant the school district.
The P rate starts at 6.
Right.
Allison, are you going to that?
I probably, I could come to the reception.
Well, we got 3 of us that are going, for sure.
What's it for? What's the school district thing?
It's the homecoming parade.
All of our kids that are in sports and activities kind of go through it.
Finally have an explanation of what it was. Okay.
Right, I mean, if anyone who has to go or who wants to go to the P-Raid, wants us to move it, speak now.
You said
forever.
P-Raid. I
Well, I mean, I have no problem.
understand what
I don't
that
have a
What
problem
about the
with it
board
either.
members? Are there many of them that are
This town.
conflicted?
Well, I'll be honest with you, at this point, we have a small number that have signed up, but what we were going to do is tomorrow reach out to everyone to find out what,
We'd probably check
whether they're
that
coming or
before
not.
you.
What's that?
I would probably check on that before you make a decision.
Yeah, but I have to have some clear direction because we need to be talking to the country club, and I don't know whether we can cancel or not. So
Yeah, it's only, that's next Wednesday, right?
yeah, it's a week from Wednesday.
How many RSVPs do you have so far? How many people you got coming?
Last number was just under 20 that
Wow.
RSVP'd in favor of Bill.
So we'd have no more than about 30 people there.
So it's a low number.
How
See-
many?
We normally get about 60-some to come to this event.
We
Oh,
had
that
it
explains, well, yeah, that explains it. So I think we probably should try to find another date. We'll see if we can get out of it without paying any penalty to Valley Brook.
Yeah.
And if you can, I think we should try to reschedule it, because if you only got 27, 28 people coming, it doesn't seem...
We'll try our best tomorrow.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, zoning board reports. Anything? Anything anybody wants to see on the next agenda? Anything miscellaneous, Mr. Lauer?
No.
No, we have an executive session?
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned.